All right, I'm here today with Michal Towber, but probably I think they call you Mickey most of the time.
Yes, I have a difficult to pronounce name, which I'm sure you can relate to, but you pronounce my name beautifully, so I appreciate it very much. So I tell people to call me Mickey so that they don't feel bad about mispronouncing my name, although I really don't mind. They can call me anything.
It's awesome. Tell me where you're located and then give us a little bit of a background. What do you do in music?
Sure. So I am in Tenafly, New Jersey, which is very close to New York City, which is where I grew up. And that's where I teach out of. I'm a vocal coach, and I also teach piano and guitar and ukulele and songwriting. And I've been teaching for 12 years. And my background in music is I started studying classical piano when I was 5, like many kids of Jewish mothers, started very early. And that's how I originally learned my music theory and that side of music. And then when I was 13, I heard Nirvana for the first time and decided I had to be a rock star. So I taught myself to play guitar and started writing songs. And then I started playing around the city. And I grew up in New York City, so there were a lot of opportunities to perform. And when I was 17, I was signed to Sony Columbia. And that's when I became a recording artist. And I've been doing that ever since. I'm recording my 10th full-length album of original music now. And I've done a lot of collaborations with other people. So I appear on a lot of other records and things. And my music has been used in a lot of television and film. I do a lot of sync licensing stuff. And I'm an award winner. I won't go into all of my bio because people can look me up, but I think the relevant things are that I won an Emmy and a World Songwriting Award. And in 2019, I was the International Singer-Songwriter Singer of the Year. So I was very proud of that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I never really, in the beginning, I just sang intuitively. I wasn't like someone who went through classical singing or anything like that. I don't teach opera. I teach contemporary music. But I was really just like an intuitive singer, and I did what felt right. And then I had a vocal injury after my third son was born. And I actually got a paralyzed vocal
You have 3
cord.
kids also?
Yes, I've got 3 boys.
Oops. Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. So I'm always exhausted, although probably not as exhausted as you are with 2 very, very young babies. But yeah. So after my third son was born, I got a paralyzed vocal cord, which I didn't even realize could happen. Mm-hmm. And I just started having trouble even speaking. So I would be trying to read to my kids and I would get really vocally fatigued. And I had dysphonia where when I would sing, I would have 2 notes come out, which if you've ever heard sounds very satanic and weird and was like really scary. And so I went to a vocalogist and I assumed that it was from screaming during labor because I was doing that. But he said, no, that it's not from singing or from yelling. It's actually because your vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in your body, which is also known as the traveling nerve, touches your vocal folds. And when that gets inflamed, it can cause vocal paralysis. And it also touches a lot of like major organ systems in your body. Yeah. So it was very scary because they were like, oh, you have to go get tested for lung cancer and brain cancer and all these things. And so I went through like a couple of months of like, oh my God, what's going on? And luckily they didn't find anything wrong with me. And when that happens, it's just called idiopathic vocal cord paralysis, which means that they just like,
they don't know where it
happens.
From. Yeah.
Yeah. So they assume maybe it was because of like the hormonal changes. Cause when you're pregnant, even your voice changes from the hormones. Yeah. And so I had to go through like really intensive vocal rehabilitation. And that's when I was like, I need to learn more about the voice and about the anatomy and how to sing in a healthy way, because voice is my livelihood. And it's just really scary when your voice is such a integral component of your identity and then you almost lose it. So I never wanted that to happen again. And I learned a lot of techniques in vocal therapy about how to sing properly. And then I started studying with a teacher, Whitney Nicole, who's amazing. And that's when I really started studying in earnest. And then I started teaching 12 years ago now. And I've been teaching students all around the world ever since. And with COVID, even though it was a horrible thing, in a way, it was really a good thing for a lot of artists because it made them innovate. And so I've been teaching online as well. And that's enabled me to teach, now thousands of students of all ages and levels around the world. And I really focus on contemporary. As you can probably tell from my speaking voice, I have a pretty low singing voice, and I love singing rock and pop and blues and things of that nature. So that's really what I focus on. Although I also teach some musical theater and jazz and things like that, but I don't do classical because that's a whole different world with all the technique and everything else.
Wow, you've had quite a journey. And let's talk a little bit about, because I think that is so important. Let's talk a little bit about, because you were a self-taught singer. You just were born like, okay, I just know how to sing. Kind of like I was back in the day. It's like, well, I always thought you either know how to sing or there's just no hope. That's kind of what I thought. I thought like either you're born a singer or you're just tone deaf. Like, what are you going to learn about singing? And it's kind of funny because I always ask myself, why do people think that? Because I mean, everyone understands that if you want to start playing the piano, no one says, well, you can't play the piano, there's no hope. Well, then you start learning it, and then you can start playing easy pieces, and then maybe later some difficult pieces. How much, because for me, that was a revelation when I actually started in college. I realized that although I was a pretty good singer to begin with, it was amazing to me how much I still didn't know how to do, and how how difficult stuff is just not possible just swinging it. You have to know more. And how much do you think can actually be learned? How much does someone need to be a natural, but how much can actually be learned in your experience?
Yeah, I think the learning component is huge. And there were, I was an intuitive singer and I had certain strengths to begin with, but there were definitely things that I still needed to work on. And I think learning to sing is a lifelong process. I'm still learning all the time, and that's why I love, taking other people's courses and being involved with other coaches, because everybody has something to add to the conversation. And I actually learn a lot from teaching too, because you get to see the learning process in real time. Like when you have a baby and you see them develop consciousness and language, and you can learn so much, almost like retroactively by just observing them learn. And so I think there is a genetic component. I think we all are born with a certain level of aptitude, and singing is, it's tricky because your instrument is inside of your body. And so every instrument is different, and we all have our physical limitations based on, the size and the shape of our resonant chambers in our face and our throat, and the length of our vocal folds and how thick they are. And all of that plays into what your voice sounds like. But it also gives all of our voices this unique character, which I think is really lovely. And I think so much can be learned. And it's easier to do it as a kid because obviously our brains are so plastic, and we have our language acquisition device, which I think is only present in the first year of life or 6 months of life. And so that's why it's so important to be exposed to foreign languages during that time, so that you can distinguish between different phonemes in different languages. And they've done studies where if you're exposed to jazz and 12-tone music and all these things during that really important developmental period, it really helps with development of perfect pitch and things like that. But I don't have perfect pitch. I have relative pitch,
Me neither.
And
which I think is actually a good thing.
The boat on that one.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, we could talk about why that is, because it's really interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. But yeah, I think maybe I had a genetic predisposition because we had other musicians in my family. Who knows, But I think the biggest indicator of success for me is passion and wanting it. That's when I see the most advancement the most quickly with my students. And the same was true of me. I remember when I was in high school, my high school started at 7th grade. I went to Hunter, and I tried to get into jazz chorus, and I auditioned and I didn't get in. And the teacher basically said, there's no hope, you can't sing. And that really motivated me because I wanted it so much. And I was like, nobody's going to tell me no,
You're like me.
Yeah. And I have students that start in their 70s and in their 80s singing. I have a student that just retired, and she always had this dream of being a singer, and she just never had the opportunity to do it. And now that she has time, it's this whole new world that's opened up for her. And I just did a practice Olympics with my students, and they logged their hours, and she was ahead of the pack by a mile because she just loves singing so much, and she never had the opportunity to do it. And now at the age of 70, she's singing for hours every single day and improving so much. And that's so exciting. And yes, people that are like tone deaf or whatever, which I don't really believe in unless there's something like physically wrong with your hearing or something. They're going to have a harder row to hoe learning because it's just more, they have to make up more ground, but it's never hopeless and everybody can learn. And it's just that everybody's learning all the time, like I'm still learning. So people shouldn't be discouraged if they're finding things really difficult and it's taking a long time. It's just a process. And one of the things that I always stress with my students is to remember to play. That's another reason why I think kids learn so well is because they don't prejudge, they aren't expecting themselves to be good at everything right away. Whereas like, we're like embarrassed if we try something new and we don't get it right away. Like me with bowling, I'm the worst bowler in the world. And it's like horrible and embarrassing every time I try. Also, I don't want to learn how to bowl. So it's preventing me from getting better. But, I think with adults, we forget that element of play and that element of like, it's okay to be silly and it's okay to fail and to make mistakes. And I think that's why it's so important. Yeah. Like just like making weird sounds.
Yeah. To go all the way, to go all the extremes.
Yeah. And I'm sure like, like when you do vocal exercises with people, a lot of them sound really silly. Like we do like tongue twisters and like we try to sound like ambulance sirens and everything. And for an adult to kind of like let go of their inhibitions and do that is sometimes really difficult. But that's the way that you discover what your voice can do, is just by playing and being silly and trying not to be embarrassed. And that's why it's so important to have a coach that you enjoy spending time with and that you feel comfortable with, because then you're not afraid to be embarrassed, And I think failure also is really important in learning, and especially with like performance. I think people put so much pressure on themselves to do well. And if they have one performance that goes badly, or they like their voice cracks, or they forget a lyric or something, they don't want to do it again because it's so traumatic. And I think the only way to kind of get beyond that is to realize that you learn the most from failure and just keep doing it, and like get back up again. And for me, it's like when I see a performance of a singer and it's not perfect technically, but it's honest emotionally, that's such a better performance for me than when I see something that's like technically perfect and smooth and sounds like everybody else. I would 100 times out of 100 rather see somebody give a performance that's flawed, but that moves me emotionally. And so I think if that passion and that honesty is there, then that's what you really need to be a successful singer.
Absolutely. I agree. And, the thing about this human element, humans are very intelligent in connecting emotionally. So when you're not being honest, people can all call out BS. It's like, if you're just not being yourself and you're trying to be something that you're not going to connect with anyone. Yeah. So I always say, there's a certain level of having intonation that's pretty much on point. If it's too much outside of where the pitch should be, then there's no hope, then there's no use in anything else you do. But if you have halfway good intonation and you are authentic, that's already that's half of what you need to achieve. You can, like, I always get really upset when a lot of, like in my Facebook group, there are so many people in there, and, I get a lot of messages, and it's like, well, listen to me sing. And the thing is always, they say, help me be a great singer. It's like, what? How can I be a great singer? It's like, there's not one thing I can tell you to be a great singer. Yeah. But it never fails. They always send me clips where they do things that are way outside of their skills, like because they heard it and it sounds so cool when the singer does it. And so they want to do whistle register, but they're totally not, like, they haven't even mastered getting anything right in chest voice, like being on pitch. And always, I just don't understand. It's like, I always say, I would rather you do something so extremely simple, like sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with just a few pitches, very small range, but do it really well and do it with your heart, then try all this acrobatic vocal stuff. And it just sounds like you're trying way too hard, and it's just not, no, it's not. It sounds, it's bad, Let's talk about perfect pitch, because a lot of people think this is so cool if you have perfect pitch. Now, I don't have perfect pitch. You said you don't have perfect pitch. I have a friend who has perfect pitch, and that's a mess. It messes him up. And I don't have that. It's like, it never messes me up. You give me a piano that's tuned
Yeah.
slightly low or high, I'm totally fine. It might feel just a little different in my voice, but it doesn't throw me off. Now, you tell me your experience with people who've had perfect pitch.
Yeah, coming up through the classical piano world, a lot of the musicians around me had perfect pitch, and it was like they would hear a fire alarm or something, and they would be like, "Oh, that's a C sharp," you know. And I never had that ability, and it can get in the way in singing, especially because we all have our vocal classification and our ranges, and you know, you either are like an alto or mezzo soprano or a soprano or a tenor or baritone or a bass, and you sing the songs that are within your range. And if you hear a song and you have perfect pitch and then you try to transpose it into a different key, meaning, you know, you try to move it into a key or a lower key, for those that are listening, to make it fit your voice better, it's not going to sound right. You know, you're going to say that's not the key that the song is supposed to be in. It's going to sound out. And for me, it's no problem to modulate a song into a key that's better for my voice and easier to sing. And it doesn't bother me. Whereas like, I feel like if you have perfect pitch, you're constantly hearing when things are slightly out, and even if you have relative pitch, every key has like a certain character to it a little bit, you know? So if you transpose a song into a different key, it might change the character of the song a little bit, but it doesn't bother me the same way that somebody with perfect pitch, it might bother them if they transpose a song into a key that's not the original key. It might just sound completely wrong to them. And I also think there's like a quality to the human voice where it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. You know, if you ever like watch your voice in real time using like Melodyne or something, and you'll see even the best singers, their voices are never exactly dead center. And when you record and you're making a record and you use like auto-tune on all of your harmonies and everything else, things sound really flat. Like they have not like flat in terms of pitch, but like flat in terms of affect. And it loses the character that makes the human voice beautiful. And it's all these little places where your intonation goes out and it's rubbing against other things that actually give your voice a lot of character and make it sound human and interesting and exciting. So if you have perfect pitch, that's another place where it might bother you, where you're going, oh, you're 10 cents off, you know, and here or there, and it might sound out. But for me, it's like a Baroque pearl. Music shouldn't be perfect, and pitch doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, you know, to be really good and have a lot of soul.
Well, when you talk to any string player, they will know this. They will always be against autotune because it just doesn't work, and music just doesn't work that way. So the leading tone is always closer to the root note. It's always a little high. It's always a little high if it's the leading tone resolving into the root note. String players know this. There are some half steps that are closer together than some others, depending on the melody line and where it is on the scale. But you can't do this when you auto-tune stuff. So, and even, I just actually this morning recorded a bunch of videos for my new program. There are 10 mindset videos about very common issues. And one is really about, like this, we don't want to be perfect like robots, because like you said, it doesn't give it depth. It's just flat. It doesn't have a dimension to it. And I just personally don't like auto-tuned stuff. I can hear it. I can hear it instantly. And people always like, how do you hear this? Like it takes away the oscillation also. It takes away some level of the overtones, and it makes it just sound, to me, auto-tune is like, Melodyne it's much nicer because you can manually, sometimes I'll do this for students when I record. I'll put it through Melodyne and then I'll listen. And just when I listen and something bothers me, that's when I will do something about it. But if I think here, this doesn't bother me, that this was slightly sharp because actually it makes sense, I won't fix it and the thing is, even modern software, when you do like a guitar player, you can tell the program to be more human or less human. So you add that human element, that means the timing isn't going to be dead on. It's going to be slightly human. And even the intonation is going to be, and the clean, how clean it is going to be more or less human depending on how you want it. But it always sounds better when it's not robotic and like a computer calculated.
Yeah, it's an interesting philosophical issue that we're going to have to be more and more in tune with, right? It's like,
Yeah,
if
really.
you look at like everybody's freaking out over DALL-E, which is like the graphic designer that produces all those images if you give it a prompt, and it's like, what's the difference between a human graphic designer creating something and giving it a little bit of humanity versus like a robot auto-generating something? And like, can you really tell a difference? It's kind of like talking about like analog versus digital, it's like that extra human element. I don't know if it can be faked yet. Maybe at some point it will be able to be with AI and technological advances, but it's kind of like a fine line where you don't want to go too far in the direction of making everything automated and everything perfect, like quantizing every drum beat and everything else, because then it just sounds like it wasn't created by a human.
Okay, so let's go back to your vocal injury issue.
Mm-hmm.
So how old were you when this happened?
This was, I think I was like 30. So yeah, right around there.
Okay, so not that young, not too old, kind of in the middle of your life.
Yeah.
I got in trouble when I called someone middle-aged once. Maybe I don't know what middle-aged means.
I know. I assume that it was like the middle of your life, but I think people, it's getting later and later.
Yeah. So we're not middle-aged, I guess. So, but anyway, having had that experience, and now that is something I've never experienced. And I'm very blessed that I've never had anything like that happen to my voice. But talk a little bit about, how long did it take you to really get to a place where you felt your voice is stable? And what were the most important things that you did to make sure that you use your voice in a healthy way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that's definitely one of the tenets now of my teaching practice, is trying to sing in a healthy way. And what does that mean? So I think having the vocal injury, it took me a few months to get back to ground zero. And then really understanding the physiology was so important. And we did a lot of things like straw phonation, which we can talk a little bit about, and a lot of the semi-occluded exercises, which are very gentle, and really just encourage your vocal folds to adduct completely and oscillate it in a healthy close and oscillate in the right frequencies and things. And so all of that was really helpful. And it was like a very intensive kind of plan. It was very gentle. So I wasn't like overusing my voice. And then eventually I got back to a point where my voice was better than ever, because now I understood why things worked and why other things didn't work, and I had a lot of assumptions about singing that came along with my being an intuitive singer that were incorrect, so learning about the physiology really, really helped me. And even like when I ask my students, like, what parts of your body do you use when you sing? There's a few parts that always come up, but then there's other parts that people don't even think of, like everybody obviously says like, oh, you use your vocal cords, you use your lungs, you use your lips, your tongue, but nobody talks about like your core strength, and how important that is. And I think a lot of singers wrongly assume, and certainly I did, that you're singing from here, and that's where you get your power from, And so if you're constantly pushing from your throat and those tiny little muscles, that's going to cause a lot of fatigue and strain over time. And I think a lot of young singers, especially, they're young, they're healthy, they can push their voice and it doesn't have long-term consequences. But there are so many singers that are professional that have had vocal injuries. Like, look at Miley Cyrus, she had like edema in her vocal folds and had to have surgery. And Adele, that sound amazing, so you would never think that there was anything wrong with their technique.
Well, because they did too much of that thing that is eventually going to hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're an athlete, if you're really pushing yourself constantly. And I always think about like the singing competitions and like what they've kind of done to our perception of singers in society, because people are always trying to sing louder and higher and do more riffs. And not everybody's voice is going to be capable of that, even with the most training. And if you are going to attempt that really extreme singing, you have to make sure that your foundation is really secure and you really understand what you're doing, because over time that can really cause injury. And like you said, I think there's a lot of beauty in like simplicity and going back to the basics and really making sure that we're doing things properly. So for me, the first thing that blew my mind was just being aware of like what parts of our body are involved in singing, and understanding that when you want to get like a powerful belt, it has to come from the big muscles in your core. And I think just being a healthy person in general makes a big difference in being a healthy singer. So having core strength, having cardiovascular fitness to a certain degree. I mean, if you're getting winded going up a flight of stairs, it's going to be very difficult for you to sustain a note for a long time. So I think that's number one. And, you know, just taking care of your body, getting enough sleep, hydrating, all that stuff is going to affect your voice. And then really understanding how to position the different parts of my singing apparatus that I never really even thought about, like the soft palate, you know, like I never knew what that was. And I never knew like that you could raise and lower it, and that, you know, or your diaphragm and like how that works involuntarily, but you can kind of influence the way that the diaphragm works by your breathing and everything else. So for me, it's really having an understanding of the physiology, and really understanding breath support, I think, is very important. And a lot of problems can be traced back to the breath, you know, even just something very basic like that, where singers are not taking a full breath and they're not breathing into their bellies. And you see them taking these little shallow breaths, and that's really going to affect their ability to sing well. So all of that kind of played into it for me.
Let's go back a little bit to those type of exercises you did, like semi-occluded. You know, like vocal cord closure is so important, and how they, you know, how they close. You can either have them clash together, you know, when you have like really glottal attacks, which is going to cause a lot of strain. What kind of exercises did you think were helpful? You said the word gentle, and that's always, you know, that's always good. I have some warm-ups where I specifically said, this is a gentle warm-up. You know, we'll start with humming, but always avoiding that harsh glottal attack, especially the onsets. I think that's where a lot of danger lies for people who just kind of like, they know how to, they could just push it and it'll come out, but you might hurt something in the process.
Totally. Yeah. And it's kind of this like a negative cycle too, once you have those, you know, when you're smashing your vocal folds together, and then you get swelling, and then you need to push harder to get sound and all this stuff. So
you get all the phlegm on there.
Exactly. Yeah. So semi-occluded vocal tract exercises are great. And one of the things that I started doing in vocal therapy that I found incredibly helpful, and I've continued to do just in my teaching and everyday practice, is using straw phonation. And you can take like any straw that you have. I have a special singing straw here, which is, it's got a little tiny diameter. And what singing through the singing straw does is it elongates your vocal tract, and it gives you back pressure. So you're going to get some resistance, and it pushes some air back into your vocal folds. And it prevents you from hurting yourself, because you actually can't push that hard through the straw because you're getting that back pressure. And you need to give enough compression to get a sound out, because the diameter is so small. So it really balances out your singing voice. And so I like to use this with all of my vocal exercises. You can do any of your regular vocal exercises through this, although obviously you can't make certain like consonant sounds. So it's really like humming. But one of my favorite ones is just to do a glide and to go throughout your entire range and go from your chest voice to your head voice and back down again. And that sounds like this. It goes. Yeah, it sounds like an ambulance siren. So it's like woo, but through the straw, and it's very quiet, which is awesome. So another benefit of the straw is that if you're practicing and you're self-conscious and you don't want to make a lot of noise, if you sing through this, it really cuts down the volume. But it's a really good way to work your transitions. So when you're going from your chest voice to your head voice, or in reverse, you can go over your passaggio and smooth out your break. If you do that slide and you hear places where your voice completely drops out, then you can kind of zoom in and do the slide just over that section. And it really gives you feedback on how your breath support is and how your overall technique is. So that's one of the exercises that I love. And you can do any melodic pattern through the straw, you know, like if you wanted to do like, hey, 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 hey. I like to alternate between that, which is one of my favorite chest voice exercises. And then I just do it through the straw. So it'll be like, And I apologize if it's getting cut out by Zoom, because Zoom always assumes that singing is background noise.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And by the way, someone who doesn't have a special singing straw, you could just use one of those plastic straws and then just kind of pinch it that way. You know, the more you pinch it, the less air fits through and the more you're going to have that compression, and you have to use your core. It's another element here because there is this resistance. You have to use more of your core to kind of push it out. I always say, you know, if you have lots of air that moves through the vocal cords in a short period of time, that's always bad. It's almost like friction, you know, like it rubs against.
Yes. Yeah. That was another misconception that I had about singing that kind of blew my mind. I always thought to get more sound, you needed to blow more air.
It's the opposite. And
Exactly.
people always think for opera singers, like, wow, if you hold that top high pitch for such a long time, and my goodness, you must need so much air. But it's exactly the opposite. When you hold that really high pitch, it's almost like you're holding your breath completely. Like, let's see if it cuts me out. But if you go like, it's just like, I'm not even exhaling at all. It's like I'm holding because it's the vocal cords are so tightly closed and there's such a small little opening. I could hold it forever. I have a video on YouTube about like, you know, where I experiment with how long can I hold a pitch. I don't know how long the longest was. I was like 33 seconds or something, but
yeah, that's great.
It's that concept of, you know, in bel canto, we call it inhalare la voce. It almost feels like you're inhaling. Of course, never, ever vocalize backwards like inhaling. Don't. It's very unhealthy. But it's just named that because it feels almost like you're inhaling instead of exhaling because you're holding on to the air so much. So yeah, I think straw exercises are so good, especially for people who have a tendency to just push too much, to not have good vocal cord closure, who have breathiness. That's very beneficial to have more of a, you know, feel the subtlety of how do my vocal cords come together. And also you can feel the vibration, you know, you can kind of feel it here. It buzzes and it tickles you. So you can feel where it will vibrate.
Yeah. One of my other favorite straw exercises is actually doing if you have like a mason jar of water or something, and you can stick your straw down into the water. Blowing bubbles, because then you get extra resistance from the water. So you're getting the benefit of the straw and the water. And it's also just a great visual cue to see if you're exhaling at a steady rate. And it's a really good like visual feedback immediately, because that's one of the components of breath support, is making sure that you're not breathing unevenly when you're exhaling. Because when you breathe out suddenly, it can bend your pitch up also. So you don't want to be going, ooh, you know, when you're singing.
Yeah. And another thing, you can do this even another exercise that I do without the water to check here's the thing, your pitch will be steady if you have steady airflow, and you will have steady airflow if you're using your core support to control how much air you're pushing out. So what I like to do is like do little jumps. So if you are holding a pitch and you do little jumps and you hear a lot of, you're not really controlling the air. But if you hear very little of, but you can still kind of really hold it steady, that means, you know, it's like karate. When you use your core, someone can hit you in the belly and it's not going to hurt you because your muscles are tense. And it's kind of the same. Your jumping isn't gonna, like, you know, sometimes when I ran around on stage singing opera, we would have to actually jump around, and we had support going on here big time, because that jumping did not need to affect our voices. So we had to use a lot of support to be jumping, and still the voice is perfect, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And there's a lot of singers that do very, you know, choreographed dancing, a lot of the pop singers, and a lot of them use pre-recorded tracks because they don't want to deal with that getting out of breath and everything. But then you've got singers like Beyonce, who really does sing live and jumps around, and her voice is amazing.
Moving.
Yeah. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but they said that her dad used to have her run on the treadmill and sing at the same time to train her to do that. but yeah, there's a lot of singers that can really jump around and their voice sounds perfect. And you know what you said about getting hit in the stomach, I use that a lot with I always think about like Houdini, you know, who of course was that very famous escape artist and had all these brushes with death and nothing ever happened to him. And then he used to allow his fans to come up and punch him in the stomach to show how he was like made of steel. And one time somebody came up and punched him when he wasn't ready, and that's what ended up killing him. Because I think his appendix ruptured or something. And
oh goodness, I didn't
so
know
when
that.
you're singing, you really want to make sure that you're prepared and activating your plate of abs and your side body and your back body and all that, because that's what's going to give you that power and that nice steady tone.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about support. So I'm curious to know, how do you explain support to your students? Because a lot of people are like, well, diaphragm, you support with the diaphragm. How do you explain support?
Yeah, so good question. So, you know, a lot of singing, I use like visual cues or prompts because our voice is inside of our body and certain things work for certain people. But I never want, support is tricky because you don't want people to think that they have to be like tensed up, you know? So it's a fine line between being supported and activated and being tense or introducing strain. And I like to think about it like, you really can't sing if you're collapsed. If I'm sitting like this, my vocal tract is kinked and I'm really not getting any power. My voice is completely disconnected. I get that really weak kind of sound. And you don't have to be using an enormous amount of support, but you always want to be engaged. It's almost like you just want to have good posture, sit up nice and straight, make sure your chest is nice and open. You know, you can think about wearing a crown on your head and you're looking forward or even a little bit down on the floor, but never like this, never like this. And just a little bit of support is enough for most singing. So I like to think about when you go down for a sit up and you feel that plate of abs kind of activate. And if you come up and you use that same amount of support, that's really enough for most singing. And when you're going for like super powerful notes, you can activate your Houdini support.
Yeah. You know, it's so true that that's the big difference between a lot of pop singing and classical singing. Although I feel that depending on what you sing, really. So when I sing like a Barbara Streisand or Whitney Houston power ballad, that level of support is like way up here. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, that like I did gigs all the way up till the end. And well, boy, that was hard because I was like, where's my support? You know, your ab muscles separate, they go to the side and they're literally not where they used to be. They're somewhere. And it's really hard to have any support when you're like highly pregnant. And I remember singing
twins. Oh my God.
I mean, I remember, and I did some videos about that and I was like, wow, it's really difficult, but literally when you do those, I feel like when I do these very high belted parts, as well as when I'm singing classically and I sing, for example, really fast coloraturas, that's when I need this really, really, really activated support. It feels literally like doing a bunch of, you know, ab exercises and it burns. It literally burns. A few years ago, I recorded Let It Go from Frozen in the studio. And that was one of those instances, you know, like especially that let the that high, it's like an E5 belted. And I always remember like, okay, after I was done, I always laid on the floor. I'm like, my abs hurt now. But
yeah, I think that's another misconception too with people where they think like, if I feel any sort of burn, I'm singing incorrectly, you know, but it is an athletic pursuit, you know, and I think it has to be in the right spot. You don't want to feel like you're losing your voice or your vocal folds are really fatigued or anything like that. But you do feel you're using muscles. So you are going to feel tired, especially when you're doing these really athletic songs. It can definitely take a lot of resilience and almost like physical training to be able to sing those songs because you are an athlete, you know, you are using your voice in this really athletic way and it requires training and really putting in the reps and strengthening your voice and your core and everything else.
Yeah, now, of course, like you said, support isn't like this static thing. just like the melody is not static, it goes up and it goes down, and there's some crescendo and decrescendo. It has some level of dynamics, and it goes together with your support. Your support will support. You need more support for louder and higher pitches, and you need a little bit less tight support for low and breathy and a relaxed voice. So it's this constant, it's constantly doing something. You're always moving, just like I have a lot of students who have a really hard time singing ballads because there's so much small stuff changes happening within a short period of time. You can't stay in one gear. You have to constantly change the amount of breathiness, how tight your support is. The dynamics is like, I am singing now, and this is so different. It's like it changes all the time. You can reach me by railway. You can reach me by railway. I mean, you constantly changing gears, and it doesn't sound the same. You can reach me by railway. Just doesn't sound the same if you don't do all these things.
No, that's a great point. I think you can really hear when somebody is more experienced, because there is all that variety, and it makes the bigger moments sound more climactic in a way. If you use them sparingly, you don't want to always be in like that full pedal to the metal kind of belting state. And a lot of singers think they need to like blast the whole song. And that actually takes away from the impact, because your ear gets tired as a listener. You want to just have that, one or two places where you really get loud, and then everything else is kind of building up to that. And it's that tension and release throughout the song that really creates interest.
Yeah. And that's very important for people who sing a lot. When you when you sing a lot of rock and you have a gig with your band, listen to Tina Turner, for example. She does not sing those songs full blast from front to end. She would kill herself. She has very smart technique, very smart. She actually uses a lot of her low voice, which it doesn't maybe sound like that to some people, but she can sing quite low. And I can't sing some of her songs because they're just too low for my voice. High is no problem, but low is always the problem for me. Or Karen Carpenter. She doesn't sound like she's low, but she's an alto, and she's like, some of those songs are just too low. I'm going to have to transpose them.
Yeah. I mean, even Billie Eilish, a lot of my students love singing her, and she's got an incredible low range and an incredible high range. She goes really low and really high, and a lot of the younger students, they want to sing her and they can't get that low. And she just naturally has that really low range. Yeah.
Well, can we talk about that? That just reminds me of Miley Cyrus. Now, Miley Cyrus is one example of a singer. She kind of made something really cool out of the change that her voice went through. So when you listen to her, like really early stuff, she has this very young, much brighter voice. And of course, then she had a lot of problems, and her voice has darkened so much. And it's now this, it's just, I think it sounds really amazing. And she has learned now to actually add some healthy technique to where she can actually do that and continue singing. What do you think about like her journey? Because I think this is a great example of someone who just kind of sang because they knew how to, and then oops, that's not, if I sing every single day for so many hours, that's where I get in trouble. But now I saved my voice. There are some people who never saved their voices, like in history. I always think of Joe Cocker.
I think it's Bon Jovi now is having a lot of issues. A lot of these singers that have been singing for so many years, and they sound nothing like themselves, and they have to lower all their songs and make the ranges smaller. And
when you can't get the rasp out anymore, that's just no fun, because it's in your speaking voice. It's there all the time, and you just can't get vocal cord closure anymore.
Yeah.
So, but talk a little bit about Miley Cyrus.
Yeah. So Miley Cyrus is a really interesting case. And I think especially, these young singers that get put into the music industry, and there's so much pressure on them, and they have to perform these crazy hours and schedules. Every single day they're performing for hours and they don't get any rest. And she really didn't have the time to develop her technique. She was just put on the world stage and expected to sing all the time. And she really damaged her voice. And like you said, now she's kind of rehabilitated it back and her voice has changed a lot. And I think that can be really difficult for some singers. Everybody's voice changes throughout their life. And, one of the big ones obviously is when boys go through puberty, their voice drops, and girls, it changes too. It's just more subtle, but so many things can impact your voice throughout your lifetime. And I don't know if you found during your pregnancy that your voice changed, but my voice got lower during my pregnancy from the hormones. And it actually stayed a little bit lower even after. And people don't even realize that things like that can happen. And obviously we want to minimize the changes that happen from overuse and bad technique and things. But I think one of the healthiest things to do as a singer mentally is to accept that your voice is going to change and that you have to kind of like embrace the imperfections and grow into your voice and really make it your own. And it kind of goes back to when we were talking about singers trying to do stuff that's outside of their skill set, and that they haven't gotten to. People try to sound like other singers and they get upset when they can't, and they try to imitate them. And I think one of the really important things as a singer is to just find the things that you do well and the things that you don't do well, and kind of lean into the things that you do well, and those develop your strengths and create the best version of your voice. And that's not to say that you shouldn't work on the issues that you have and try to make them better, especially if they're technical issues, but you don't want to be trying to smooth out all the imperfections, And so I think, like, especially with Miley Cyrus, it could be very damaging to somebody who's gotten known for one sound and then suddenly has a completely different voice. It's like Jennifer Grey having a nose job at the height of her career. And then that totally changed the trajectory, but Miley has really taken it and run with it. And now she's got this great raspy kind of deep voice that really works for rock. And she's found a way to use it in a healthy way. And I think it's great that singers are so transparent now as well when they have issues, because we realize that even celebrities, they're not superhuman. They need to have good vocal technique. They need to work with coaches and continually check in with their voice and be monitoring and make sure that they're doing things in a healthy way. And hopefully, you can have a healthy career and keep singing through your entire life if you're careful. And that doesn't mean that your voice is not going to change. And you might have more of a tremulousness in your voice as you age, or it might become weaker and you might lose some of your high notes or your low notes, but your voice is still beautiful, even undergoing all of those changes. And you can still use it in a really effective way, as long as you're healthy and mindful of how you're using it.
Yeah. One thing to remember really is that the human body, and that is your instrument, it's just very dynamic and plastic. And I love the fact that, it's almost like your body always wants to repair. If anything's damaged, your body wants to repair. It might not be the same as it was before. Like my body probably is never going to be the same after having twins that was before, but that's okay. It's almost like, it's almost like you wear it with pride because of what you've been through. And even singing, even if you sing a lot, and that will change your voice. As long as you respect where you're at and you try to kind of listen to your body, not to abuse it, but to respectfully use it and be grateful that, it's like, thank you so much for letting me use this instrument in this way and making all these sounds. It's amazing. I'm always amazed with the human voice, because there's no instrument in this entire world that can make so many sounds. Well, there are synthesizers, but really, that's not like one instrument. It's just a bunch of digital stuff. But there's no analog instrument that can produce that many sounds. It's endless of like what kind of sounds you can produce. And I think it's just fascinating how dynamic it is and how things can change, but you can change, even you can embrace all those changes. If you embrace and you accept who you are as a singer, not trying to morph yourself into something you're not, but, take from your favorite singers what they do well, but don't try to sound like them. Just emulate their technique and then make your own thing out of it. I think then you'll be a happy singer.
Totally. Yeah. And what you might lose with like, the plasticity of your voice as you age, you gain in life experience, and that can go into your interpretation, and bring out more richness there. And there's a lot that you can do to keep your voice healthy throughout your life. And look at people that run marathons when they're 70 and 80, or like are yogis, and they look amazing, so if you keep using it, you don't lose it as much. But obviously wear and tear of being on this planet definitely affects our voice as well.
I would love, maybe at some later time, I would love to have another talk with you about actually interpretation, because you do a lot of songwriting and connecting with a song. That's a big part, because a lot of, it's not just your vocal technique. There's so many dimensions. Maybe we can meet again sometime, but we're out of time for now. Tell everyone, how can they find you, like on Spotify, on the socials, on YouTube?
Sure. So if you want to find my music, I record under my full name, which is Michal Towber. It's MICHALTOWBER. And I'm on all of the places, the iTunes, the Amazon Music, all of that, on Spotify and everything. And then I also have a vocal coaching channel on YouTube, and that's Michal Towber Vocal Coaching. And then if people want to email me to reach out and ask me any questions, or inquire about taking a lesson or something, it's my first name dot my last name at gmail.com. And I always try to respond to everybody, so that's the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will definitely. I don't think I've listened to your songs yet, but I will definitely look you up. And you can look me up on Spotify too. I've started uploading a few of my songs, because I have so many on my drive, and I've never published them. So they're not, they're just kind of in my home studio, but I thought, why not?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you. This hour flew by, and I love everything that you do. I've been a fan for a long time. So it's really, really nice to chat with you.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll do this again and then explore that aspect of song interpretation. I think that'll be interesting also.
Definitely.
All right. You have a great day.
You too.
Maybe talk soon.
What makes you unique as a singer? Don't you want to stand out from the crowd? It's not just a beautiful voice, and it's not just all about vocal technique. There's so much more that flows into it. Your personality is very important. Your mindset is very important. If you have doubts, and if you're terrified of singing in front of people, that will certainly